The document was signed at 3:47 p.m. Jerusalem time on January 16th. 4 pens touched paper in a conference room overlooking the Old City. Foreign Minister Gideon Sayar smiled for the cameras. U.S. Ambassador Mike Huckabee offered congratulations. The press release used familiar language about technological cooperation and strategic partnership. What it didn't mention was the number that had been circulating in classified briefings for weeks: 847 million ounces. That was the amount of silver that would be required annually if the Pax Silica Initiative achieved its stated objectives. It was more silver than the world currently mined in a year. And Israel had just become the first country to sign on. The ceremony itself lasted 11 minutes. General Erez Eskel, the Defense Ministry representative, signed first. Then U.S. Undersecretary Jacob Hellberg, whose portfolio included critical minerals as much as artificial intelligence. The photographers captured handshakes and flag backdrops. The journalists filed stories about American-Israeli technological cooperation. None of them understood what they had just witnessed. This wasn't about AI chips. It was about creating an entirely new supply chain architecture that would consume silver at a rate that would make the space program look modest by comparison. The Pax Silica Initiative, a name that suddenly made perfect sense, wasn't just about technology. It was about who would control the most critical metal of the digital age. The briefing papers told a story that none of the participants wanted to discuss publicly. Current AI chip production required 0.03 ounces of silver per advanced processor. The next generation designs called for 0.08 ounces per chip. The generation after that, essential for the artificial general intelligence systems everyone was racing to develop, would require 0.15 ounces per processor. The math was simple and terrifying. Consider the scale. NVIDIA's current production plans called for 50 million AI chips annually by 2027. Under the new designs, that meant 7.5 million ounces of silver per year for a single company. Scale that across the entire industry: Taiwan Semiconductor, Samsung, Intel, the Chinese manufacturers, and the numbers became astronomical. The global AI revolution wasn't just going to consume electricity, it was going to consume the periodic table. But the public announcement focused on cooperation and partnership. The Pax Silica Initiative would create resilient supply chains for artificial intelligence manufacturing. It would ensure democratic nations maintain technological leadership. The language was carefully crafted to sound defensive. The reality was aggressively offensive. What the press release didn't explain was why Israel had been chosen as the first signatory. The country had no significant silver deposits. Its semiconductor industry, while advanced, was dwarfed by Asian giants. But Israel had something else: a proven track record of building technology ecosystems under pressure. And pressure was exactly what this initiative was designed to create. The meeting in Jerusalem was the culmination of 18 months of quiet planning. It began with a classified report from the U.S. Geological Survey titled "Critical Mineral Dependencies in Advanced Computing." The document, still classified, allegedly identified silver as the single point of failure in American technological supremacy. Without guaranteed silver supplies, the entire AI revolution would stall. The Chinese had reached the same conclusion months earlier. Their response was characteristically systematic. State-owned silver reserves were built to unprecedented levels. Mining operations in Peru and Mexico were acquired through shell companies. Export restrictions on silver-bearing minerals were quietly implemented. Beijing wasn't trying to corner the silver market. They were trying to control the technological future. American intelligence agencies watched this buildup with growing alarm. The Strategic Materials Command ran war games modeling silver supply disruptions. The results were classified, but leaks suggested they were catastrophic. A 6-month silver embargo would cripple American AI development for years. A permanent cutoff would end American technological leadership entirely. The Pax Silica Initiative was designed as the countermove. Instead of competing with China for existing silver supplies, America would create its own supply ecosystem. Partner nations would pool resources, share technology, and guarantee each other priority access to critical materials. It was NATO for the digital age, with silver as the nuclear deterrent. Israel's inclusion made perfect sense from this perspective. The country's defense establishment had decades of experience managing resource constraints. Their technology sector had proven capable of innovation under siege conditions. Most importantly, their intelligence services had networks throughout the global silver trade that could provide early warning of Chinese manipulation. The signing ceremony was deliberately scheduled to coincide with other events. While the world's attention was focused on the Iranian uprising and the Greenland crisis, a fundamental shift in the global technology order was taking place in Jerusalem. The timing wasn't accidental. American planners wanted the agreement operational before China realized what was happening. The immediate market response was muted. Silver prices rose 3% on the day, which analysts attributed to general geopolitical uncertainty. The technology stocks actually fell, as investors worried about supply chain disruptions. But in the classified briefing rooms of intelligence agencies around the world, the response was electric. Everyone understood that the game had changed. The technical specifications buried in the agreement's appendices told the real story. The Pax Silica nations committed to developing AI processors requiring 40% more silver than current designs. In exchange, they would receive guaranteed access to strategic silver reserves maintained by the partnership. The logic was brilliant and ruthless. If you can't starve your competitors of silver, force them to consume even more while guaranteeing your own supply. Taiwan's response was predictable. Within hours of the Jerusalem signing, TSMC announced it would carefully evaluate joining the initiative. The company's executives understood the implications immediately. Either join the American-led partnership and guarantee silver access, or risk being excluded from the supply chains that would power the next decade of technology. South Korea moved even faster. The government in Seoul had been quietly briefed weeks earlier. Samsung's chairman had personally lobbied President Yoon to join the initiative. The company's silver consumption had already tripled in the past year due to AI chip production. Without guaranteed supplies, their foundries would be reduced to making memory chips while competitors built the future. China's response was swift and predictable. The Ministry of Commerce announced new restrictions on rare earth exports to countries participating in discriminatory technology alliances. It was retaliation, but it was also confirmation. Beijing understood that the Pax Silica Initiative was designed to break their technological leverage. The rare earth restrictions were all they could do in response, but rare earths weren't silver. China controlled 90% of rare earth processing, but only 30% of global silver production. The Americans had chosen their battlefield carefully. In a silver war, China's advantages were much smaller. Mexico, Peru, and the United States itself were major silver producers. The distribution was more favorable to Western interests. The financial markets began to understand the implications by the week's end. Silver mining stocks surged across North America. First Majestic Silver gained 40% in 3 trading sessions. Pan American Silver hit new all-time highs. Even small exploration companies with marginal silver projects saw their valuations double. Smart money was betting on a decade-long silver supercycle. The technology sector's response was more complex. Companies with strong silver supply chains saw their stocks rise. Those dependent on Chinese suppliers faced selling pressure. But the real action was in private markets, where technology companies began bidding aggressively for silver supply contracts. The spot market was becoming irrelevant. What mattered was guaranteed delivery 3 to 5 years in the future. Industrial users outside the technology sector watched these developments with growing alarm. Solar panel manufacturers had already been struggling with silver costs. The new demand from AI chips threatened to price them out of the market entirely. The green energy transition, dependent on silver-intensive technologies, suddenly faced an existential threat from the digital revolution. The geopolitical implications rippled outward in concentric circles. The European Union, caught between American and Chinese technological spheres, found itself facing an impossible choice: join the Pax Silica Initiative and anger Beijing, or stay out and risk technological irrelevance. Internal debates in Brussels reportedly became heated as member nations split along predictable lines. Germany's position was particularly tortured. The country's industrial base depended on Chinese markets, but its technology sector needed American partnership. The auto industry, rapidly transitioning to electric vehicles that required both silver and Chinese rare earths, faced a nightmare scenario. Some executives privately predicted that the technological Cold War would split the global auto industry permanently. Japan's inclusion in the initiative surprised no one. The country had been systematically building silver reserves for months. Sony, Nintendo, and other technology giants had been quietly stockpiling silver through financial instruments that kept their exposure hidden from competitors. The Jerusalem signing simply formalized what had already been decided in Tokyo. Singapore's participation was more interesting. The city-state had no significant technology manufacturing, but it controlled crucial shipping lanes for silver transport. Its inclusion suggested that the initiative's architects understood that controlling physical flows would be as important as controlling production. The port of Singapore could become a choke point for Chinese silver access. The Netherlands brought ASML to the partnership. The company's extreme ultraviolet lithography machines were essential for advanced chip production. Their inclusion meant that Chinese foundries would face restrictions not just on silver supplies, but on the equipment needed to use it efficiently. The technological embargo was becoming comprehensive. The United Kingdom's participation was largely symbolic, but symbols mattered in technological warfare. British universities contributed AI research, and London's financial district provided silver financing mechanisms. More importantly, UK inclusion brought access to Commonwealth silver production in Canada and Australia. The UAE's involvement was the most surprising. The country had minimal technology sector, but massive financial resources and strategic location. Intelligence sources suggested that the UAE would serve as a silver trading hub for the initiative, providing market liquidity while maintaining plausible deniability about the partnership's more aggressive aspects. As January progressed, the partnership's structure became clearer through its actions rather than its announcements. Member nations began synchronizing their silver acquisition strategies. Mining deals that had been stalled for months suddenly received expedited approval. Environmental reviews that typically took years were completed in weeks. The speed of these approvals revealed the initiative's true urgency. American intelligence assessments apparently suggested that China was preparing its own silver stockpiling campaign for the second quarter of 2026. The Pax Silica nations had perhaps 90 days to secure long-term supplies before the competition intensified dramatically. Mining companies found themselves in an unprecedented seller's market. Silver mines that had been marginal at $30 per ounce were suddenly profitable at any price below $100. Development projects that had been shelved for years received full funding overnight. The entire silver mining industry was being mobilized for a technological arms race. But physical mining couldn't expand overnight. New silver mines required 3 to 5 years to develop. Existing mines could increase production marginally, but not enough to meet the exploding demand. The mathematical reality was inescapable. Either AI development would slow dramatically, or silver prices would rise to ration demand. The futures markets began pricing in this reality. Silver for delivery in December 2026 traded at $110 per ounce. The December 2027 contract reached $125. Options markets were pricing in scenarios where silver hit $200 per ounce by 2028. The technology revolution was literally pricing itself out of existence. Corporate treasurers faced impossible decisions. Technology companies needed silver for AI chips, but they also needed to control costs for shareholders. Many began treating silver as a financial asset rather than an industrial input. Apple's cash hoard, for instance, was reportedly being converted to physical silver holdings that could guarantee future production. The strategic implications went beyond simple supply and demand. Countries with significant silver deposits suddenly found themselves holding geopolitical leverage they had never possessed. Mexico's president began speaking about technological sovereignty and fair value for national resources. Peru's mining minister canceled a scheduled visit to Beijing and rescheduled it for Washington. Australia's position became particularly complex. The country was rich in silver deposits but geographically distant from processing facilities. Chinese companies had invested heavily in Australian silver mines over the past decade. The Pax Silica Initiative created pressure to restructure these relationships, potentially at enormous financial cost. Canada faced a similar dilemma. The country was America's largest silver supplier, but Chinese investments in Canadian mining had grown substantially. Ottawa found itself managing competing pressures from Washington and Beijing while trying to maximize value for Canadian shareholders. The technology companies themselves were splitting into camps. NVIDIA, Intel, and Apple embraced the Pax Silica framework and began building silver stockpiles. Companies with significant Chinese exposure, including Tesla's Shanghai operations, found themselves caught between American and Chinese demands for technological loyalty. The consumer electronics industry watched these developments with particular alarm. Smartphones, tablets, and laptops all required silver for their manufacturing. The AI chip crisis threatened to cascade into a broader consumer technology shortage. Some analysts predicted that smartphone prices could double within 2 years if silver availability didn't improve. The artificial intelligence sector ironically found itself constrained by the very success it was trying to achieve. ChatGPT required massive server farms filled with AI chips. Each chip needed silver. More capable AI required more chips, which required more silver. The industry was discovering that intelligence, artificial or otherwise, had physical limits. The automotive industry's electric vehicle transition added another layer of complexity. Electric cars required silver for their electrical systems. Autonomous driving required AI chips that needed even more silver. The transportation revolution was competing directly with the AI revolution for the same scarce resources. Solar panel manufacturers began lobbying for exemptions from silver allocation priorities. The green energy transition, they argued, was more important than artificial intelligence development, but AI proponents countered that artificial intelligence would solve climate change more efficiently than solar panels. The resource constraints were forcing society to choose between competing visions of the future. Investment banks created new financial products to manage silver exposure. Silver-linked bonds provided financing for technology companies while hedging price risk. AI commodity baskets allowed investors to bet on the entire complex of materials needed for artificial intelligence. Financial innovation was racing to keep pace with technological demand. The macroeconomic implications were staggering. If silver prices reached levels that constrained AI development, the entire digital economy could face a growth crisis. Productivity gains from artificial intelligence were essential to justify current technology stock valuations. Without those gains, the largest companies in the world would face fundamental repricing. Central banks, already concerned about inflation from energy and food prices, watched silver costs with growing alarm. The Federal Reserve's models suggested that silver-driven technology inflation could add 0.5% to core inflation annually if prices continued rising. The Bank of Japan faced even worse scenarios given their economy's dependence on technology exports. The Jerusalem signing had triggered cascading effects that its architects probably hadn't fully anticipated. By creating artificial scarcity through guaranteed allocation systems, the Pax Silica Initiative was accelerating the very crisis it was designed to manage. The cure was becoming worse than the disease. Intelligence agencies began reporting unusual activity in global silver markets. Trading patterns suggested that non-state actors were building massive positions. Hedge funds, sovereign wealth funds, and private investors were all betting on the same trend. The silver market was becoming a proxy for geopolitical competition. The environmental movement found itself in an impossible position. Silver mining was environmentally destructive, but AI development promised solutions to climate change. Solar energy needed silver, but so did the computer systems that could optimize energy grids. Every environmental choice seemed to require technological trade-offs. As February approached, the outlines of a new global order were becoming visible. Technology would determine national power more than military hardware or natural resources. Access to AI capabilities would separate developed from developing nations, and silver would determine who had access to AI capabilities. The January 16th signing in Jerusalem would be remembered as the moment this future became inevitable, not because of what was said in the press conference, but because of what was written in the classified appendices, the numbers that couldn't be discussed publicly, the commitments that couldn't be acknowledged officially, the future that had to be built in secret. 847 million ounces annually. That number would reshape civilization more than any treaty or declaration. Because in the end, the future belonged to whoever could secure the silver to build it, and the race to secure that silver had just begun.